Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm John, this is many a true nerd, and welcome back to Hitman, Marrakesh, and the full story. Because yes, people seem to really enjoy when I did the full story episode back in Sapienza, kind of looking in all the little kind of subplots and whatever dotted around the Sapienza level. So yeah, I decided to do another one of those for the Marrakesh level. Because the Marrakesh level is, in terms of its storytelling, just a little bit different from Sapienza. Like, at first glance, it doesn't feel like there's as much, but there's some really fun, interesting stuff about the overarching story hidden away in here. So first up, let's just remind ourselves what's actually included in the main briefing, the basic information we start with.
Your targets are private banker Klaus Strandberg and Army General Reza Zaidan, two of the conspirators in a sinister plot to overthrow Morocco's fragile government. Strandberg, a former bank CEO who stole billions of dollars worth of savings from the Moroccan people, was facing trial for investment fraud. But early this morning, a band of heavily armed mercenaries freed Strandberg from his prison transport, resulting in the death of several police officers. Strandberg now takes refuge at his native Swedish consulate, in front of which crowds of angry protesters have gathered, demanding his handover to Moroccan authorities. We believe General Zaidan orchestrated Strandberg's escape to infuriate the public and spark nationwide riots, allowing Zaidan to impose martial law. Operating out of a field HQ at a nearby abandoned school, he will no doubt use the riots to depict the Rabat government as weak and inept, and persuade the general staff to support a fully fledged military coup in the name of national security.
So the starting position is, it's suggested that Reza arranged for Klaus to be freed purely in order to escalate the anger of the crowd so that he would have an excuse to impose martial law. Now, of course, from that, we probably immediately assume, well, obviously, you know, the conspiracy runs deeper than that. They've been planning this whole thing together all along, haven't they? Well, let's just dive in and start there, shall we? Now, there's certainly a healthy amount of evidence that this whole thing was a conspiracy all along. On the rooftop where you knock out the woman in order to get the keycard very, very easily. I believe this is called the lamp shop rooftop. There's an evacuation plan here.
When the security alarm sounds, Strandberg has been instructed to rendezvous with a team of Zaidan's soldiers at the underground garage. Apparently, a secret tunnel runs between the consulate and a shoe shop downtown.
So if anything goes wrong at the embassy, Klaus will actually be escorted by Zaidan's troops to meet Zaidan. So clearly they have something going on in common. There's plenty of other evidence as well. A meeting protocol. That makes it clear that either of them can just call up the other, say a code word, and they meet in the tunnels that link the shoe shop and the embassy. So from that, it's pretty clear the relationship isn't just that Reza had Klaus released for his own ends, they've been in it for a long time. Or so it appears at first, at least. Taking the role of the cameraman and doing the TV interview with Klaus also seems to support the idea that there is a major conspiracy going on. In particular, Klaus seems to deliberately be trying to make the people of Morocco as angry as possible. He's actively trying to incite the riot outside the embassy to come and storm the embassy that will give Reza the excuse he needs to come in and impose martial law.
I must say I was surprised that Consul Olander authorized this interview. Adding fuel to the fire, I should think. But that is not my call.
And there we get another little hint of something else going on here, which is the receptionist is extremely surprised that Olander, a senior figure in the embassy, would actually authorise this interview, given she suspects this will just add fuel to the fire. And indeed, it's supposed to add fuel to the fire. So possibly, maybe there's a third person in this conspiracy. Olander. We'll get back to him later because there's more to him than we initially hear as well. I'm just going to put some of the interview up, by the way, because it's quite funny how much he clearly just wants to antagonise the people.
Everything was done in strict accordance with Moroccan law. Now, you might call it a loophole. You might call it creative bookkeeping. But the law is the law, Miss Kingsley, and I am a firm believer in the law.
Let me get this straight, Mr. Strandberg. You are openly admitting to taking this money, the $7 billion, from the Moroccan people?
Why not? An opportunity presented itself, and I seized it.
Hundreds are gathered outside this very building, howling for your blood. Is there anything you wish to say to them?
Two little words. Fuck you.
Pam, we need to call it a wrap. I think the damn hard drive overheated.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, he could not be trying harder to deliberately force people into storming this embassy. So it feels more and more like this is all a grand conspiracy planned by both Klaus and Razor all along. And yet there's some other interesting contrary evidence. Firstly, this is hardly the first time Klaus has been involved in massive embezzlement. He's got form in that department, even outside of this particular conspiracy. In fact, one of the conversations I particularly like that you can overhear out here in the hallway talks about that. I quite like the little story out here.
Let me tell you a little story. Back when he first started out, Strandberg worked for this Beijing hedge fund. Dodgy as shit, but that's not the point. He married a local woman, wealthy of course, with whom he had a daughter, Eva.
Wait, Strandberg's a father?
In the loosest biological sense. He filed for divorce shortly after the birth of their daughter. And when the ex-wife later died from cancer, Strandberg saw fit to con his estranged teenager out of a 7-figure inheritance.
You are joking. No one does that. No, that's gotta be slander. I mean, what's next? Candy from a baby?
Nah, he wouldn't do that. I hear he's on a strict protein diet.
Okay, you know what? I've heard enough.
I like that story. That's a very fun story. So yeah, Klaus Strandberg, this is far from the first time he's been involved in massive financial embezzlement, suggesting, well, maybe he was planning to do this all along anyway. Maybe it's not just the conspiracy to bring down the Moroccan government to him. And indeed, there's significantly more compelling evidence to that effect elsewhere in the level. Over in Zaydan's complex in the school, if you hang around upstairs on his first loop on the top floor, Zaydan stops and has a phone conversation outside of this window right here. If you're by this door, you're in a good position for it. And this phone conversation contains some very interesting bits of information indeed.
Mr. Olander, how is our favourite banker? Don't worry. If the Kingsley interview doesn't whip the mob into a frenzy, I will take more direct measures. No, don't be ridiculous. Our employers have no mind to reward idiotic behaviour. Strandberg was given a position of power. He only had to keep his head down and do whatever the Heralds told him. Billion-dollar investment fraud was not exactly part of the arrangement.
So, a few very interesting bits of information there, straight from Razor's mouth himself, confirming that while Klaus was indeed one of the conspirators, he acted well beyond his brief. The billions of dollars of theft were not part of the plan. Sure, he was supposed to be doing some things with his position in order to assist Razor taking over Morocco, but he wasn't supposed to be stealing $7 billion. That was actually off the plan. And if you want further proof that indeed Klaus is acting outside of the conspiracy in some capacity, and that actually it's Razor who knows what's going on in the conspiracy more accurately, well, that conversation was with Olander, a senior figure in the embassy, who therefore it is confirmed is also part of this same conspiracy. The conspiracy, we assume, Providence, the same organisation that's mentioned in the cutscene at the end of this level, but there's also a new word that's been introduced here that we haven't heard before. This entire conspiracy was organised by the Heralds, who the conspiracy, well, they're just supposed to do whatever the Heralds tell them. And the Heralds will come up again later. This is a new word, first introduced in this mission, and it comes up again later in this mission, albeit a little bit hidden away, so we'll cover that in a second. So, Providence has heralds that are telling the conspirators what to do. Olander, the most senior ambassador for Sweden in Morocco, is in on the conspiracy, as is Razor, as is Klaus, but Klaus significantly overstepped the bounds of the conspiracy, and indeed we've got these new things, heralds. Now here's something fun that it's very, very easy indeed to miss, which is the two main targets in this mission actually have separate loops they can follow. While he's in the embassy, Klaus goes through two different loops. He kind of does one loop, then he goes into the other. They're very, very similar. They basically just involve him going around the top floor of the embassy. However, he has a secondary loop that you can access by triggering a security alert and thus an evacuation. Now the easiest way to trigger a security alert is very, very simple indeed. Just head into this office over here, and there is, well, it's called a fire alarm, but it's just treated as a generic alarm. If there's any alarm whatsoever, the game basically just says, oh, there's trouble, I guess we'll evacuate Klaus then. Now, we actually touched on the evacuation plan earlier. If Klaus gets evacuated, he gets evacuated by Razor's troops out to the school, where he enters a new loop, and thus you access a whole bunch of new dialogue. So, let's just pull a fire alarm. And that's triggered an alarm, and now let's just go and join up with Klaus's security detail, as we are already dressed for the part. And there we are, having triggered the fire alarms and thus triggering the evacuation, we can now join up to this guy being escorted out. If you don't have if you don't have one of the cards of your own, don't worry, at least one of these soldiers is just allowed to open the door, so you don't actually need the card. You can just kind of go along with this chappie. And he'll now be escorted through the tunnels under the embassy through to the shoe shop. Normal rules are kind of suspended here, by the way. Like, normally you can see from the icons on the map that more of these people would be able to see through your disguise, but the game sort of gives you a bit of a free pass to be travelling around with these lads for some reason. So even though they are in hyper alert mode with the solid white circle with a circle around them, and thus would normally be able to see through all disguisers, as long as you're dressed like one of them, they just accept that you're part of the security detail. So even after the security alert ends, he doesn't return to the embassy. Instead, just like we discussed, he gets taken straight to the school to meet up with Razor. Because you see, this was his escape plan all along. He planned to do the massive embezzlement, the controversial interview, then be secretly taken through the tunnels and be escorted out of the country. That's what his actual plan is all along. He never intended to face the consequences. He kind of wanted the final thing that tips the country into total riots and civil war to be the fact that he was able to sneak out of the country, with the implication being that there was some form of government involvement, which would allow Razor to step in and actually impose martial law, even though it was Razor that helped him get out of the country. Now this I think is something that a lot of people miss, because there's not really much reason to actually escort him to this place. Like, normally if the alarm goes off, it means something's gone a bit wrong. So under normal circumstances, almost everyone will actually kill this guy before he makes it to the school. But there's a whole bunch of new dialogue that opens up in the school, so it's worth actually taking him there at least once. Odd thing though, and I've seen this every time I've escorted this guy to the school, when he gets to this point, the game often gets stuck, so you have to save and reload for these guys to call in the fact that he's arrived and him be escorted any further. See, I've just reloaded and now the dialogue is triggered. What the hell? The intern is following him. That's this level's intern, I think, trying to have a discussion with him about a watch he's sent to town to find that he can't get hold of, but he actually has to have this conversation, so he's followed him here, even though there's no reason he'd be allowed into this area. What the hell are you doing here, you mad bastard?
I couldn't have done it without you.
It's slow motion, baby. I like bankers or wankers.
Yes. Just put me on a plane. I did what was asked of me. Now I'll take my money and run, if it's all the same to you.
Why'd you do it, Klaus? We serve the same master, and we're very well provided for. For the love of God, man, why risk it all?
You don't get it. It's not about the money. It's about the game.
No, wait, please. Tell me.
Well, speaking of, I have a government to talk about.
Yes, and be quick about it.
Further proof there from Razor that Klaus went well above and beyond what he was actually supposed to be doing. Now, if we just follow these two up, there's even more dialogue, because now Razor will actually just make sure that Klaus is safely tucked out of the way upstairs in his office. Klaus will then never leave the office, though he also takes a drink from the wine glass on the right as you enter the room, which is very, very convenient indeed if you want to do a kind of a poisoning death, or if you've got some rat poison to make him run to a bathroom. I'm not actually sure which bathroom he runs to, because there's no functional bathroom in this place. I've never actually tested that. But, yeah, he basically will then be alone in that office at the end. His bloody intern is still following him. This is ridiculous. No one is challenging the fact that his intern is just going through this area. This is kind of ridiculous. Now, if you want to spy in their meeting, peephole right here around the side of the room.
Zayden, you don't need to check up on me. Everything's on schedule.
Argentina, here I come.
Of course not. You heralds are the opposite of moths. You never go near the flame. No, we don't have a problem. This is what my father wanted, what I was groomed for. Me in charge. Top dog. Tell your employers to put another pin in their map. Once this ball starts rolling, there'll be no stopping it. I'll be president within a week. Well, everyone else is just something away. I'll call you when the smoke clears.
And there is another interesting piece of the puzzle related to the overarching story of this game, rather than just kind of the story in this particular level itself. Darn, I was hoping I might be able to lure that guy over there. But yes, indeed, rather interestingly, we get some more information about the Heralds. And I guess maybe we could assume the two blokes we see at the end in this cutscene are indeed Heralds, who basically seem to be organisers, conspirators, something involved in Providence. We've got to assume it's Providence. And they are definitely a shadowy organisation that doesn't get involved and just quietly pulls the strings from behind, given we were told they were the opposite of moths, they never go near the flame. So they work through agents like Klaus, like Razor, but Klaus and Razor are themselves not Heralds. Providence has Heralds, and Heralds manipulate people further down like Klaus and Razor. We also heard from another pin in the map there that this is not the first country they've done this to. While this one is going to fail because 47 got involved, other countries have already fallen. We don't know how many other governments in the world are actually the governments as was selected by Providence, but we know from his expression there that there are at least several others. And finally, we also quickly overheard in an aside there what Klaus's own plan is. Klaus intends to simply get on a plane and be on his way to Argentina. Unfortunately, I don't think he's going to get there, because now I'm going to cut back to the second half of that phone conversation that we heard from Razor earlier in this mission.
No, my men will put Strandberg on a plane to South America, and somewhere along the way, they'll give him the drop. Yes, the scenic route. And they say Swedes have no sense of humor.
Yes, indeed, on account of his greed and idiocy, embezzling money when he wasn't actually supposed to be doing so, yes, Razor and Providence and the Heralds never actually intended for Klaus to make a clean getaway. He was going to be put on a plane to Argentina, and that plane was going to fall out of the sky. Now, interestingly, that's not the first time we've heard about planes falling out of the sky in the new Hitman. You may recall back in the first episode in Paris, Iago, you may recall, sold the flight plan for a world leader while he was on a plane, and that plane was then taken down. Taking down planes may well just be one of the ways that Providence and its Heralds operates. Worth keeping an eye on that to see if maybe that's going to show up again. And that, as far as I can tell, ladies and gentlemen, is the most of the hidden away stuff, story-wise, buried here in the Marrakesh level. Honestly, not as much story involving, say, Klaus and Razor as we had for the two targets, particularly the main male target in Sapienza. So there's less kind of information about them, but there's a lot more information buried away about what the overarching plot is, the plot involving the grey British guy and Providence and apparently their Heralds. So we get a bit more information about the overarching story in this episode, albeit a little bit less about the characters themselves. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, that to my mind is Hitman Marrakesh, the full story. Providence and its Herald, some interesting stuff there, and I look forward to seeing where that goes next. So short little episode here, there's not actually that much buried away. To my mind, Marrakesh feels actually like a little bit smaller and more limited than Sapienza. There's not quite as much to do. I think part of that is because one of the targets is military and is in kind of like a little kind of converted school, and thus it's been converted into a military base. Like, one of the things that's always been true in Hitman is the military levels have never been as fun as the civilian levels, because civilian levels you can dress up as you want and wander around doing things, whereas military levels, well, there's no real reason why anyone other than military would be there. So basically, you're either in a military outfit, in which case you can be in disguise, or you're not, in which case you have to stay hidden or you can't be there at all. So like, I've always preferred the civilian levels, and like I'd say like the levels where you were going into military bases in Hitman 2 Silent Assassin were easily the weakest part of that game as well. I'd still say this level's probably better than Paris, because it's quite big and it's quite open, it's quite mazy, and I'll be kind of interested to see what they do in terms of contracts and escalation. I'll keep an eye on that as well. So yeah, some interesting good stuff here. I like that it feels like it's a little bit like tougher at its base. There's a lot more security dotted around. Razor especially is relatively well guarded, but I think it's not quite as good as Sapienza because there's not as many interesting, unique ways to assassinate, especially Razor. There's a few for Klaus. It just feels like not quite as many as was in Sapienza. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen. Bit more Hitman Marrakesh for you, and maybe a little bit more to come if I can think of something interesting to show you. But in the meantime, I've been John. This has been Many a True Nerd, and this has been Hitman Marrakesh, the full story. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Has he got nipple tassels on? There is nothing less intimidating than a fat bloke with nipple tassels. I wouldn't kill him. We're standing on top of a pool of oil and he's holding a torch. I'm fighting the same guy 3 times at the moment. It is actually the same bloke. It's cocking Scotland, not the waste beyond the wall. This isn't Game of Thrones, it's just Britain.